So I think we are ready to start. Anna and Stephanie, I will start, and then it is up to you to decide which one wants to go first, right? So first of all, I'll share my screen just to see that everything is working. Okay. So hello everybody, it is a pleasure to be with you, even if it's virtually and we cannot meet each other in Porto Roth. My name is Maria Gonzalez. I've been working in the panel of mathematics for 7 years now. In the last 2, I've been the panel coordinator of the panel. And so today I will talk about the evaluation process, and with me, I will have Stephanie Petermichel and Anna Karayani, which will complement my talk with their experience as grantees. Anna as a starting grantee and Stephanie as consolidated grantee, but also as advanced 2020 panel member. For the questions and answers, you have a Q&A section. So I would say that if you have questions right after the talk, feel free to ask them then. Or if you prefer, we can wait until the end of the 3 interventions to actually answer questions. So the first thing that I would say, even though I guess many of you know already, is what is the ERC about, right? And the best definition, or my favorite definition of the ERC, is actually the one that we used to see anytime we were taking the elevator to go to our offices, which didn't happen in the last 15 months, which is the one that says the European Research Council Executive Agency is dedicated to selecting and funding the excellent ideas that have not happened yet and the scientists that are dreaming them up. How does the ERC do that? How do we support the best scientists? Well, we support the best scientists by offering long-term grants. Our grants in the normal schemes are up to 5 years, while in Synergy they run up to 6 years. Now, we support any field of research, although of course in this talk and in this conference, you are much more interested in P1, which is the mathematics one. But any field of research is welcome, and we welcome proposals from researchers from all over the world, with the only condition that you have to have a host institution in an EU country or in an associated country. Now, we are looking for high risk, high gain, groundbreaking proposals, right? And the only criterion of excellence, of evaluation, is excellence. What is a good thing about the ERC grants is that they are portable. So we give grants to PIs, which means that if you move to another institution, the grant will move with you. Now, the Scientific Council is the governing body of the ERC. They are the ones that decide on the funding strategy and the methodology to be followed. You know pretty well our current interim president, Jean-Pierre Brignon. He was the president until 2019. And then because of an unsuccessful president after him, we had to call him back as an interim president. Now, he will be our president, as far as I remember, until the end of this month, because there has been a new president elected, although it has not been announced, have not been announced yet. So we actually don't know who the person is, but we hope to know in the coming weeks. In the Scientific Council, there are 22 Scientific Council members. These 22 Scientific Council members cover the 27 panels of the ERC. So there's no one member per panel if you want. And there's a president, and then there are 3 vice presidents, each of them responsible of one of the domains. There are 3 domains in the ERC: PE, Physical Sciences and Engineering, to which P1 belongs, Life Sciences, and Social Sciences and Humanities. As you know, we are just starting, with a start in 2021, a new framework program, which is Horizon Europe. So you can see here the evolution of the money allocated to the ERC in the different framework programs. So we started in FP7 with 7.5 billion allocated. Then we moved into Horizon 2020, run between 2014 and 2020. And at that time, we had 13 billion allocated. Now, Horizon Europe starts from 2021. So starting 21 is the very first call of Horizon Europe, and will run until 2027. Now we have 16 billion allocated. And this may not look like a huge increase, right? But you have to keep in mind that Horizon 2020 counted on 28 countries, but Horizon Europe counts only on 27 countries because of the Brexit. Now, this corresponds approximately to 17% of the entire Horizon Europe budget. Now you have to keep in mind that this 16 billion does not count on any money coming from associated countries, because actually this money is, or these associated countries, the agreements are ongoing at the moment. So there's nothing signed apart from the fact that UK will be an associated country, because this was part of the Brexit agreement. So now, before I talk about the calls and the evaluation process and everything, I wanted to tell you a bit on how we are coping with COVID, how the ERC is continuing in COVID times. So in what concerns evaluations, all our 2020 calls run remotely. So starting, consolidator, and advanced, which means that we had virtual panel meetings for 3 to 5 days, for many hours, people in different time zones. And we had to make adjustments because, of course, we did not expect this. Nobody expected this to happen. So for starting 2020, the Scientific Council decided that given the tight time, there will be no interview. So starting 2020 has been the first call of a starting that run without interviews. Basically, the decisions on step 2 were based on part B2 of the proposal only, and not on the applicant's interviews. And then for COC 2020, the Scientific Council decided there will be interviews because they are a great plus in these calls. But this time, applicants were not allowed to have a presentation. They had an oral presentation, but they were not allowed to share any visual aids. Now for 2021, Advanced 2020, of course, had no interview because there wasn't the case in 2020. It all ran remotely. And now for 2021, starting is already ongoing. So we already had our step 1 meeting, and it has been decided already that step 2 will be remote, and it will have remote interviews. But this time, applicants will be able to share a presentation and everything. So it will be more or less as it is when we have on-site interviews. Then consolidator will take place. Consolidator step 1 will take place in September, and it will also be remote. Then there is no decision yet being taken on consolidator step 2 or advance altogether. So that's still to be decided. Now, what happens with our ongoing grantees, people who already have a grant, our PIs? Well, the Scientific Council and the ERC know that this has been and is still a very difficult time for our researchers, because this situation makes difficult research visits, organization of conferences. This is a great example of it. So even organization of workshops, summer schools, even hiring is more complicated now. So all our grantees can request an extension due to COVID, and these extensions can go from 6 months to 2 more if needed. So that's what we are doing. We are actually hoping to resume soon and go back to normal, to people coming on the premises and everything, because it is much better for everybody, I think, especially for those that are in different time zones. So now what I would do is I'm going to talk about the different funding schemes, like the main funding schemes, starting, consolidator, and advance, and also about synergy. But later on, I will concentrate on the evaluation flow of the main 3 calls, starting, consolidator, and advanced. So if anybody's interested in knowing about synergy, which is a call where mathematicians have actually been quite successful, and Laszlo can tell us more about this, I will be happy to answer questions, and I will have a colleague with me in a virtual booth that we will have running from tomorrow until Friday. So feel free to pop in there, and we will explain more in detail how the evaluation process for synergy works, which is slightly different to the one in starting, consolidator, or advanced. So the first of our funding schemes is starting. Starting targets researchers that finished their PhD between 2 and 7 years ago, right? You have to keep in mind that this eligibility window can be extended in cases of maternity, paternity, military service, or long-term sickness. The minimum time commitment that you should commit to the project is 50%, and the maximum amount of money you can request is 1.5 million. But in all funding schemes, you can request an extra million, and this is new because before, depending on the scheme, you can ask for an extra million for costs like relocation. So if you're coming from outside the EU or an associated country back, you could ask for this, or people that have the need of really expensive equipment. I mean, this is the equipment part has never been the case in P1 because of the nature of our projects, but everybody can apply for this. Of course, it's the final decision of the panel whether they will approve this full million or part of it or nothing, or it depends how would you argue your request. And the maximum time that the starting grant can run for is 5 years. Then it comes consolidator. Consolidator is for researchers that want to consolidate their career. So therefore, they finished their PhD between 7 and 12 years ago. The same extension for the eligibility window applies. So maternity, paternity, military service, long-term sickness, you can also apply for an extension here. Then the minimum time commitment here requested is 40%. And you can ask for up to 2 million, with this extra million also applying here. And again, the maximum time for the running of the grant is 5 years. And then finally, you have advanced grant. Advanced grant is targeting established researchers that have a significant record of research achievements. Then this record refers to the past 10 years. So even though in advance there is no eligibility window as such, this 10-year track record can be extended exactly for the same reasons as in a starting and consolidator, you can ask for an extension of the eligibility window. Then here, the minimum time required to be spent in the grant is 30%, and the maximum amount of money that you can request is 2.5 million, with this extra million also possible. And the maximum time that the grant will run for is 5 years. And now it comes synergy. Synergy is a bit different because it doesn't have the same nature as an starting or a consolidator or advanced. Synergy is not for a single PI. Synergy is thought on for a group of PIs, 2 to 4 PIs, one of them that can be in anywhere in the world. So it's not this EU associated country restriction. One can be outside. Then the career stage of these researchers can be at any time, any career stage. It is true that if you look at the profile of applicants for Synergy, there are more on the advanced profile, right? But that's not, it's not a requirement. Then what is special about Synergy is that the Synergy grants should be grants where if those 2 to 4 PIs do not join forces, the project will not happen. So these 2 to 4 PIs have to have complementary skills. Then the amount of money that you can request is 10 million. So it's substantially more than in the other ones. And you can request, if I'm right, up to 4 million of extra budget for the same things as before. Now, the maximum running time for a Synergy grant is 6 years, and the minimum time that researchers have to spend on it is 30%. So now, I will move now, or everything that I'm going to say now is related to starting, consolidator, and advanced. So feel free to pop it in the booth if you have questions about Synergy. Then, if you're thinking on applying, the more you know, the better, right? So what I would do now is I will walk you through the evaluation process from before the deadline of submissions until the results are available, because I believe that if you know what's going on, you will know better how to properly write your proposal, right? So here is how the evaluation process looks like. We have two kind of big parts: the submission deadline and when the results are available, so the very end of the race. And you will see that before the submission deadline, actually well before the submission deadline, like a year or a year and a half ago, panels are recruited, which means that the panel is formed well before we know the content of the proposals that have been submitted to the panel, right? So then it comes the submission deadline. We meet with the panel chair to allocate proposals. Then it starts the evaluation of step 1. We meet on step 1. It is decided who goes to step 2, who doesn't. It starts the remote phase for step 2. And then there is a step 2 meeting where you take funding decisions, and then the results are available to the applicants. So if we start with the panel formation, I can tell you that the Scientific Council has to have many things in mind when they recruit the panels, because there are several constraints they have to meet. I mean, they have to ensure that the panel coverage is as optimal as possible. So we have a series of descriptors, so we cannot cover everything, but the coverage is as optimal as possible. They have to think that panels have to have certain amount of renewal, that you cannot have more than 2 people from the same country, and no more one, of course, more than 1 from the same host institution. And also there has to be some balance, some gender balance. Then, of course, everybody knows if you check panels, some experts may be reinvited, but that's not always the case. So just for everybody to keep in mind. You know that every panel has a series of descriptors, right? We have in the ERC we have 27 panels, 9 for life sciences, 11 now for PE, and 7 for social sciences and humanities. There was 1 panel added in PE, 1 panel added in SH because of the huge amount of applications in those 2 areas that they gave enough to actually build 2 new panels. Now, each of these panels has a series of descriptors, and then I will talk about the maths ones more in detail. And then each panel has an average of 15 panel members, right? Actually, in mathematics, it's not 15, but more 14. So we usually have 14 because we are among the smallest panels in the whole ERC. So we have 14, but you have other panels that have many more applications, and they have up to 18 panel members sometimes. So if I go into detail, these are the P1 descriptors. What you have to know about the descriptors is that the way the scientific council sees descriptors is not as an exhaustive list. You know, it's not that they classified what is in the panel. It's more as an indication of the type of content that the panel covers. There were some modifications that are applicable from this year for 2021 and 2022 calls. In the descriptors of P1, there are slight modifications, but before we had 21 descriptors. Now we have 22 descriptors, and the main change is on the statistics part. So before we had 1 descriptor that was P114, that was statistics, that's it. And the scientific council decided that because there was this internal, sometimes among panel members and also in the community, impression that statistics in mathematics only meant mathematical statistics. So then there was this feeling that there were proposals that covered generic statistical methodology without any particular application that had no place in the panel, or it was this perception. And therefore, the Scientific Council decided to clarify this issue and added 1 descriptor specifically on that. So now P114 got renamed to be mathematical statistics, and P115 is generic statistical methodology and modeling. And the other descriptor that had a slight modification was P120, that in the past used to be control theory and optimization. Now it also includes operations research or operational research, depends on who says that. And then why is this? Is because operational research as such was only included in one of the social sciences and humanities panel, SH1, together with econometrics. And it was felt also that while the core of operational research lies within computer science and mathematics, then this was not mentioned in any of the 2 panels. So the Scientific Council decided we will modify P120 and we will add also operations research. So there are 22 descriptors. And if you think about what I said before on the panel recruitment, there are 22 descriptors for 14 panel members, or 15 in the best case. So when the submission deadline is reached, is the time to work on the allocation of proposals. So for doing that, we meet with the initial panel chair, and the person, he or she, it depends, has to decide on which proposals go to each panel member, whether there are proposals for which we need the input of another panel because it has some sort of a interdisciplinary component. So usually we ask for input from panel members of other panels in the ERC. And in the allocation of proposals, you have to keep in mind that each proposal is going to be allocated to 4 reviewers, which means that if you Consider there are 22 descriptors, only 14 panel members, but in the end, your proposal has to be assessed by 4 panel members. I mean, if you're lucky, you will have 1 panel member close to the topic of the proposal, but the rest will be quite far. So you have to keep this in mind when you write your Part B1. So once we have the proposals allocated to panel members, we open the step 1 remote evaluation. That means that panel members individually work in the reviews of each of the proposals they have assigned. So what do you have to keep in mind about step 1? Who is involved in the review of proposals? Only panel members. Therefore, you have to keep really this in mind, that they act as generalists, because you may have a proposal in algebra that is being reviewed by somebody in numerical analysis, right? So you have to write your proposal in a way that is accessible to all the panel, to the whole panel. Then the only thing that is assessed is Part B1, right? And the only criterion of evaluation is excellence. So what you should see Part B1, you should see Part B1 as your invitation for an interview. It's like the hook. You get panel members interested in your proposal, therefore you go to step 2, and then in step 2, they have access to Part B2, and you have your opportunity to explain, come and answer questions and all these things. So it is really your invitation to come. It's your pass card, right? How do they evaluate your proposal? They evaluate it at 2 levels, research project and principal investigator. And I think it's better if you actually see the kind of questions they have to answer, to have an idea, or to ask yourself, have I covered all in my Part B1? So the evaluation form that they have to fill in looks like this. This is open information, so you can find this on the guide for applicants and the guide of peer reviewers. So they have to comment on 2 aspects. One is the groundbreaking nature and potential impact of the research project, and the other one is in the scientific approach. So on the first, they have to cover these things. To what extent the proposed research addresses important challenges, whether it's ambitious and goes beyond the state of the art, and whether it's high risk, high gain, which are all these words that you heard at the beginning of the talk. And then they have to comment on the scientific approach and the feasibility of the project. So these are, if you ask me, this is the weak point of those Part B1s that are not successful, is the fact that people forget that you have to give hints so that the panel can assess the feasibility of what you are trying to propose, right? It's not that I'll do this and this and this, but if you don't say at all how do we do it, it's just impossible to assess the feasibility. So give hints on your scientific approach. The panels know that the methodology as such doesn't come in Part B1, but it will come in Part B2, but still you have to give them something. And then in what concerns the principal investigator, there are several questions that have to be answered or have to be rated. That is, whether you have demonstrated the ability to conduct groundbreaking research, whether you have provided evidence of creative independent thinking, and that's quite important actually for starting grants especially. Then to what extent does the PI have the required expertise and capacity to actually execute the project? And then there's a special section in the case of advance, which is whether the PI has demonstrated sound leadership on the mentoring and training of young scientists. And I have to emphasize here, mentoring is not something that is taken at all into account in a starting or in a consolidator grant. So now, once everybody has reviewed Part B1, panel members submit the reviews like 2 weeks before, 1 week before the meeting, and then a compilation of reviews is circulated to the whole panel. So by the time they meet here, everybody has read all reviews for all projects. And then there is a discussion, and then actually each proposal is discussed one by one, so that at the end of the meeting, the panel has a rank list that will contain 3 types of scores. A, which means you go to step 2. B and C, there are rejected scores, but they have a different meaning. If you have a B, it means that your proposal is of quality, but not enough to actually get to step 2. While if you get a C, it means your proposal actually does not have the quality expected. And then, of course, this B and C comes with a different resubmission restriction. So if you get a B, you will have to wait out 1 year, while if you get a C, you will have to wait out 2 years. And then once the rank list is finalized, the panel has to still do quite a lot of work. So for the proposals that go to step 2, the panel has to nominate remote reviewers. And remote reviewers are a list, they will nominate a list of 10 to 12 people because we hope to get at least 4 reviews. And they nominate people that are experts on the area of your proposal, right? And then for those that are not successful, they write what we call the panel comments. The panel comments are a summary of the discussion in the panel itself and on the result or on all the consensus the panel achieved. You have to keep in mind that the panel meetings run for 3 to 5 days, around 8 hours per day. So it's really, really exhausting for the panel members. Now, if you keep all of this in mind, when writing your Part B1, you should think about panel members as generalists, not as specialists in your field. And then you have to, I would say you have to write a clear proposal. You know, it has to have a structure. It has to be clear what is novel in your approach, what the goals you want to achieve. You know, if you want to achieve a really ambitious goal, are there any intermediate goals that you want to achieve? Why you are the best person to actually carry this project? And really, really important is the panel needs to assess the feasibility of the proposal. So I got this from a panel member. You know, panel meetings are intense and exhausting, believe me. And now there are people who actually follow our panel from midnight until 7 in the morning. So that's even worse for them. So try to make their work easier by writing a very clear proposal and to the point proposal. So once we finish the step 1 meeting, and it's clear who goes to step 2, who doesn't go to step 2, then we open the step 2 remote evaluation. In the step 2 remote evaluation, you will have again panel members who will be assigned to your proposal, but this time, in addition to panel members, you will have a specialist in the field, right? So this generalist approach doesn't work anymore. These people do know about the area of your proposal or one of the particular areas of your proposal. So what do they evaluate? Now they evaluate Part B1 and Part B2. They evaluate Part B1 again because Part B1 contains your CV and the applicant is again evaluated. The only criterion of evaluation is again excellence, and they will again assess both research project and principal investigator. Now, what is different on the type of questions they have to answer, right? You know, Part B2 is the full proposal, and therefore in the full proposal, there is methodology, there is a budget, there is a team description. So of course, there are questions now that come up on top of the ones that they have to answer for Part B1 that address the research methodology and the working arrangements, whether your proposal involves the development of new methodology. And also they will be asked whether the time scales are appropriate, the resources are appropriate, and your commitment is appropriate to actually execute the project. In terms of the PI, the questions do not change from one form to the other. So now, when you're writing Part B2, again, the clear structure is essential because you have to make sure that a person that reads a proposal needs to know this is state of the art, this is what the person wants to do. These are the risk mitigation steps. These are the intermediate objectives. It has to be clear, right? What is your work and what has been done already? What do you want to achieve? And now, how do you want to achieve it? What is your methodology in your work plan? It is also the time to talk about team members. You know, how are you going to do this with 1, 2, 3 PhDs, postdocs? What do you have? And it's not a requirement that you know exactly how your team is going to look like, because these things also evolve with time. When people get a grant, they start by thinking, I'm going to recruit 3 PhD students, but it doesn't work out. And in the end, instead of 1 PhD student, I will get 1 postdoc. I mean, the budget, you can adapt it as time goes. So, but you have to give an idea on what your team is going to be. Then one particular piece of advice is do not overdo in mentioning collaborators, because that's something that people tend to do. They tend to say, you know, I'm going to work with this, and this person. And sometimes that is huge, because you may get the impression if I give big names or then that will give credibility to my proposal, but actually it's the other way around, because then it is unclear whether is this your proposal of it. This is a group proposal. So do not overdo when mentioning collaborators. And also I will tell you that maybe people do not realize when they apply, but when you apply, there is a box in the, I think it's the A form that you tick that says, I have told, or everybody that's mentioned this proposal is aware of that. So if you put 1,000 names, you mean that these 1,000 names should have been told you are mentioned as in part B2 of my proposal as a potential collaborator. Then something that is important and that panels do not welcome if you don't do is to acknowledge the work of others. So you have to know your competitors and you have to mention work that has been done by others. You cannot just ignore it, because when proposals are sent to remote referees, those remote referees could actually be in the group of competitors or would be people that are really aware of what's going on in the field. So if you on purpose take out something, everybody will notice, or at least part of the reviewers will notice. Then it's also part B2 is a time where you have to justify your resources. And then you have to keep in mind now that if you want to ask for budget for open access, you have to put it here. Then the change from Horizon 2020 to Horizon Europe is in Horizon 2020, everything had to be made open access within 6 months of publication. Now in Horizon Europe is immediate open access, right? Immediate open access is mandatory, but of course, in mathematics, kind of you have the tendency to put everything open as access from the moment you have a preprint. So HAL and archive are perfectly okay, open access compliant with the ERC, right? So for the moment of the application, you have to keep in mind that if you have a grant, only full open access venues will be eligible for reimbursement, but that's once you have a grant. Once everybody has submitted the reviews for step 2, it will happen exactly the same as in step 1, but this time we have also the reviews for remote referees. All reviews are in our system. We collect all reviews, we make a compilation. This compilation is being sent to panel members who have time enough to read them before they meet in step 2. And then what is special about step 2 is the interviews. And actually now there will be interviews for all calls. In the past, we only had interviews for starting and for consolidator, and for Synergy, because Synergy always had interviews from like 2018. So now the Scientific Council decided, if we have interviews for starting, we have interviews for consolidator, we have interviews for Synergy, why don't we have interviews for advanced? So now all calls will have interviews. So a step 2 meeting will be, the majority of the time will be dedicated to interviewing applicants, and then to finalize a rank list with funded and non-funded proposals. And this time the panel writes feedback to all applicants, successful or unsuccessful. So a bit on the interviews. I mean, the format of an interview is usually, there's a 25-minute slot allocated for an interview. The way the interview is arranged really depends from panel and from call. But usually I would say that in mathematics, the panels usually decide for a 10-minute presentation plus 15 minutes questions, right? This timing, these 10 and 15 are really tight. So if you are told you have to give a 10-minute presentation, you better rehearse and make sure that you say everything you want in 10 minutes, because once the 10 minutes are gone, your time for presenting is gone. So if you have to keep in mind this, I would say that if you have, that the panels have your CV in front of them because they have access to Part B1. So if you have to spend time on the presentation talking about yourself, just reduce this time to the updates. So what is new from the time you submitted your application? Are there any papers that were submitted to a journal and have been accepted? Have you changed positions? Those are the things that you should mention in your interview. The rest of the time should be dedicated to your scientific project. And I got this from a friend of mine that works also and as a scientific officer, that he said once, you know, these interviews are not human resources interviews. We are not, the panel is not interested in how you perform in an interview. They are scientific interviews. The panel is interested on the project, on the scientific project. And it is a chance for you to clarify things that maybe the reviews from remote reviewers had brought up, like questions. It is your chance to better explain what is unclear in your project. What I would say in interviews is that you have to be ready to defend or to explain your budget. So do not make the mistake of going into the interview knowing that you have a table that says I'm going to ask X, Y, and Z for staff, for this and for this, but not having a clue why you have put those numbers in. So do not answer things like, I don't know about this because my host institution asked me to put this and this and this number. It is your proposal. You should know everything about what is said in part B2 of your proposal. So now these are some tips that are actually coming from some of our panel members. You know that because in step 2, you involve remote reviewers, which are experts on the topic of the proposal, there are many questions that you will get from panel members, because they are the only ones present in the room, that will be voicing questions that come from remote reviewers. So sometimes these are really precise questions. So answer honestly and as precisely as you can. So listen carefully to the questions and answer them directly. Give a specific rather than general answers. And also when I say this, keep in mind that time is tight. So go to the point, answer the question, do not take a lot of time, because what can happen is that if you take a huge amount of time to answer something and you don't answer it precisely, then there may be some other questions in the pipeline that never get to be answered because your 15 minutes are gone. And then it is perfectly okay to say, I don't know, or at this point, my proposal is maybe overly optimistic. This can happen, and I've seen this happening when, you know, panel members get really excited about something you're explaining. So you get a question, and then you get another question, and then you get another question, and eventually the questions kind of are a bit outside the scope of the project. So it's perfectly fine to say, oh, that's a good question. Actually, I didn't think about it. You know, it's perfectly okay. And in the case of starting, I would say, especially starting, I would say be ready to argue your independence. So you do not get offended if you get a question on the line of, you know, tell us what's different from the work you did with your supervisors, because the panel needs to know this is your project and these are your ideas. So remember, they have to rate, or you have to assess your creative independent thinking. So that is a natural question for a starting grant. And then I think then Anna and Stephanie can tell you more, but my overall experience in the panels, I've been in 40 panel meetings already, is that the panel are a nice bunch of people that are genuinely interested in your project. So the atmosphere is usually quite relaxed and nice. Then just to finish a few more things, some beliefs that are around, or that things are not clear, and when people talk about ERC grants, is that budget is allocated on demand. The scientific council decides on a percentage of budget that is allocated to each domain, but then within domains, the budget is allocated according to the money demand to the panel. So it depends how much money is requested in the whole lot of proposals that you got. Then success rate is flat across the eligibility window, which means that some people have the tendency to think, I want to apply for a starting, I would rather wait until I'm nearly 7 years from my PhD to apply, because I will have more chances to succeed. That's actually not true. And then the quality and the potential of the applicants is evaluated in view of the concrete career stage and local conditions, because we are well aware that in different places things work differently. You may have access to certain things in one and not in others. So each applicant or each proposal is judged individually. Then already having an ERC grant does not guarantee you will get another one, although you will know about many people that have been quite successful on getting grants, but there are others that get one and they cannot get a second one. So it is not a guarantee that if you get one, then all the rest come straight away. But it is true that resubmissions have a significantly higher success rate because you learn from a successful application. So here I will give you what I will tell you what is open now. Starting is ongoing. The submission deadline was in April. In Consolidator, it was also April actually, starting in Consolidator because of the budget approval came really, really close. The only call from 2021 still open is advanced. So you can submit a proposal for advanced grant until the end of August. This year, because of the tight schedule and in the new framework program coming in, there are no proof of concept grants or synergy grants. And now to finalize, just to tell you that there is a lot of information available now. The ERC has made a huge effort to explain the process so that everybody can have a good understanding of what should and what should not be done when you're applying to an ERC grant. So together with the external communication department and the scientific department, some of our colleagues have developed videos that cover what to consider before applying, how to fill in the applications, Part 1 and Part 2, a bit on the interviews, and also how the evaluation works. And you can find them, all these videos in YouTube. Then there is more information. You have the guide for applicants, you have the work program, and also you have the guide for peer reviewers. This is targeting the other side of the coin. This is targeting the reviewers, the panel members, and the remote referees. But if you read it, then you will know what they're asked to do. Therefore, you will get more information on what are they looking for, how I should write my proposal, what are they going to have to answer, what are they looking for in each of the parts. And then in the ERC website, there's plenty of information on grantees' experiences and funded projects and other additional opportunities for people to kind of get to know more how an ERC grant works, if this is an ERC grant, and so on. So I think if there is still questions after today, I will tell you that from tomorrow until the end of the conference, we will have a virtual booth. You can visit the website of the booth, and there you have all the different sessions. So we have in total 5 sessions with the links in Zoom. They are also in the schedule of the conference. So I will be there tomorrow from 12 to 1:30, and then from 5:15 to 6:15. Then on the 24th, Thursday, again to 12, 1:30 and 4 to 5:30. And then on the last day from 12 to 1:30. So I think that's all from my side. So if there are questions now, Laura will tell us. And if there are no questions, then we can go to either Stephanie or Anna. I don't know which one wants to go first.
I think we can go
Laura.
probably with one of the panelists because there are no questions for the moment.
That's good. Thank you, Laura.
You're welcome.
So who wants to start? Do you want to start, Anna?
Sure, I'm happy to start.
Okay.
Yeah, either way works, but yeah. Right. So I am a starting grant holder. So I applied for the ERC starting grant 2018. So this, I guess that was that cycle. It got started in January 2019, and it runs until December 2023. Right, my area is the Langlands program. So the topic of my grant is something within that. It's called P-adic arithmetic geometry, torsion classes, and modularity. That's the title of my grant application. It sort of covers something at the intersection of, or sort of covers kind of some algebraic geometry, some number theory, some representation theory, but sort of really mostly focused on number theory, but with connections to these other things. And the way that I structured my grant was to have 3 projects that are sort of related in the sense that you could imagine like each one of them building on the previous one, but also having some independence in the sense that you could still make progress on any of them without having had necessarily like having finished the first 2. So And I guess the first project is more algebraic geometric, and the very last one is more number theoretic. So it's kind of like this continuum. Right. So one thing that I want to discuss is sort of how to find or build the idea that you will focus your grant on. And it's tricky, right? That's sort of that might be the hardest thing that you do when you apply for an ERC grant, is to kind of like, what's the topic of the grant going to be? And that's because, it is really supposed to be something groundbreaking, right? So the criteria are really about excellence and pushing beyond the state of the art significantly. And so, I mean, it's a little bit tricky to just come up with a brilliant idea overnight. So the one thing that you have to do is just give yourself plenty of time, first of all. And even, that can be even like on the level of years, or maybe, like when you have a new idea, or, you're a few steps in your research ahead of everyone else, right? Like that everyone gets a point where sort of they're really sort of, they've discovered something new, they've just understood something, right? That could be a good time to apply for an ERC grant. So like you have to kind of think strategically, and maybe at some point you feel like, okay, now I'm in a good place. Then I remember I spent about a month. So I spent about 2 months thinking about the ERC grant. First month, I was just really trying to narrow down what could my project be. And the second month, that was right before the deadline, was like actually writing the proposal. So already, right, like sort of 2 months before the deadline, I was thinking, okay, I'm going to apply. Let me try and figure out, like what projects am I going to submit? And you can spend even more time than that. That's how it worked out for me, because that's when I was moving to a new place to start a new job. So it made sense to consider applying for a grant then. But you can spend more time than that. And I guess you have to, even if you have a great idea, like it can be useful to develop it more, in the sense of, like figuring out like how much do you actually expect, you can do with your idea, like how general is it? What different kinds of settings can it apply to? What consequences can it have? If everything works out exactly the way that you want to, like what major applications is it going to have? And, that takes work to just think about that. And I guess when you design it, you have to be optimistic. And so, but like, if you are optimistic and you think, okay, like things are going to work out the way that I want them to work out, like, what am I going to get out of it? And I think, if you are working with somebody on this, then this is something that you can discuss with your collaborator, right? Like kind of developing the idea, even if you're, it's entirely your idea. You can also like say, when you go to a conference, discuss with people and get a sense for, like what applications would it have? Because sometimes maybe you know how to prove something exciting, but you don't see that it can also be used for something else, right? So just generally developing it to really kind of make it a richer thing than just that one idea. I think that's, because it has to be a substantial project that is gonna go over 5 years. And I guess, it's sort of like the way that you build a research program in itself. One thing to say is I actually find, from that point of view, applying for a grant quite useful, because it really forces you to sit down and think, what am I going to do over the next 5 years? So whether you get the grant or not, it helps you really like focus and develop a research program in some intentional way. And so I think it's worth doing. But just to say, you really want to give yourself time to do this part even before you start writing. Then I guess, for writing the proposal, I took about a month. And, there's part B1 and part B2, and it's up to you. Whether you start with really like the part B2 that's more technical and more detailed, and that really explains how, you're going to go about proving the theorems they want to prove. For some people, that's useful. And then, you sort of write part B1 as more of a kind of a summary with less of the methodology, right? And less technical. Or you can start with part B1 and then use that as some sort of sketch that then when you go to part B2, you really fill it in. But just to keep in mind, right, part B1 is 5 pages, part B2 is 15 pages. That is a lot of writing that you're going to do. And especially the 15 pages, like they are meant for experts in your field. And so you have to be quite detailed, right? And you have to be convincing. And I guess, yeah, so there's a lot of work. In part B1, I guess the work is primarily on sort of motivating it, you know, like why, you know, what are you going to do? Why is it important? Why now? You know, like, why is it, you know, really kind of novel and beyond the state of the art in your field? And in part B2, I guess a lot of the work is, you know, actually like supplying some evidence that you can do this. So like details and things like this. So let's see. I mean, I guess Maria has mentioned these things, but I also want to reiterate that, you know, for instance, you want to show that you have a good knowledge of the state of the art in your field, right? Like that's part of what you need to do, because how are you going to really transform your field if you're not aware of what's happening? So that has to do with this, you know, like mentioning, citing the work of others, really showing that you have a broad knowledge. Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, I'm a little bit sick. Let me try to continue. One thing that's really good to do is try and get some feedback. So I was very lucky to have a mentor who was willing to give me several rounds of feedback. And so I was able to send him part B1 relatively early on. And then that's really good if you have someone like that who can also be sort of honest with you if it's not great. Because the more time you have, if you start off and it's not great, the more time you have, the more you can really sort of change it, right? If it's early on, you can start from scratch again if it's not good. And this wasn't my experience with the ERC, but it was my experience with another application where somebody just told me, too technical. You know, the people reading this aren't going to really follow. And I started over. So that's something that can be useful. Another thing with part B1, it's useful if you can send it to people from other areas, right? The panel is generalists. And somehow like the best way to get a sense for whether generalists would get something out of your part B1 is to actually send it to some people from other areas and get some feedback. And so I sent mine to topologists and algebraic geometers that were further away. And in fact, it was quite useful because one of the algebraic geometers suggested to me, oh, you know, this is how you should motivate it. So I sort of, in my field, there was some kind of new development in the past decade. And this person said, well, why don't you try saying it like this? There was a new wave. There was a first wave of theorems in your field that led to this and this spectacular result. And now we're experiencing a second wave. And that I felt was a very good way of explaining, you know, like why now is an important time in my field and why we're on the cusp of getting some exciting new results, right? It wasn't just kind of incremental. It was a difference in sort of the kind of result. It was a qualitative difference in terms of what became accessible in the field. So, right, and I think like sort of trying to emphasize that your application is not just incremental. It's not just like, you know, strengthening a little bit something that's already been done, but really doing something completely new. Like I think, yeah, you really want to be on the side of sort of completely new rather than incremental. And so you have to find a way, despite all the technicalities, to get this across in part B1 to the panel. And I guess I used sort of the first half of the first page of part B1 to just kind of explaining this is what's happening in my field. in this kind of first wave, second wave, using this kind of metaphor. All right, let's see. But yeah, generally just feedback is good. If you can get it, you know, like that will only make your proposal better, I think. I've also sort of said a bit about the time that I used for elaborating this. Another thing to say is, I think Maria mentioned, like, you know, panelists get very tired because they have to go through these intense meetings, right? And also reviewers tend to be busy people. So it's good if your proposal is readable, right? And the way that you can make it readable is by making it as structured as possible, I think. Like that can help, right? Guide people, you know, give them a sense. Here you're explaining the state of the art. Here you're explaining your objectives, highlight your objectives so that, you know, they don't have to wonder, you know, like what precisely is this person gonna do? Like you can really, you know, really make them concrete. You can even say something like a proposed theorem or, you know, but like have a highlighted objective that is clear. And then, you know, in part B2, have methodology, objective, you know, like methodology. Here's the first objective, here's the second objective, highlighted and so on. So like a lot of structure will make it easier to read and will make it easier for people to be able to tell, you know, are these interesting projects, you know, are these going to go beyond the state of the art? Are, you know, are they feasible? If they can, you know, literally think, oh, is this project feasible? Well, let me go to the methodology section and let me read this part. So it helps them focus. Let's see. I think your CV, right? There's some flexibility. I'm not quite sure about this, but for instance, you have to mention maybe any awards or things like this, but it's not clear what's an award, right? So one thing that I did was I just highlighted things that I'd gotten in the past that were competitive. Like I was in the US and I got NSF grants. And so I wrote about those and I explained, you know, this percentage of people get it. I don't know, like, I don't know what counts as an award or not, but I mean, it's a chance for you to highlight things that you have, you know, achieved in the past or recognition. And it's sort of up to you what to highlight. I also emphasized work with students. I don't know if this matters for the ERC starting grant or not, but I did put this when I had advised a student research project or, you know, I mentored students in a problem session or things like this. Just, I guess I thought, okay, since I'm asking for PhD students and postdocs to be supported to work under me, it can highlight that I do have experience working with younger people. I guess one other thing I want to say is I got a lot of support from my institution throughout the application process. And I guess that's a bit unequal because depending on where you are, maybe you get good support and maybe there aren't so many structures in place. But you should try and find out what structures there are in place, right? So there might be somebody who is tasked with helping you devise your budget. And if there is someone like that, you should take advantage of that because yeah, somebody with experience will help you through that process. And it's much harder to just make a budget on your own. Another way my institution supported me was through organizing a mock interview. So, and I think this is really the best way to prepare for the interview is just have a mock interview. It doesn't have to be many people. It can be something like 2 or 3 people. It can be, mine was about 10 colleagues. Takes about an hour. And, you know, that's really the best way to get a sense for how you would perform in an interview is to just practice it. If your institution doesn't support you in this way, you can still ask colleagues to help with this, right? You could imagine having a mock interview with just 2 colleagues who are maybe even from elsewhere. You can do it on Zoom. It will be helpful, I think. The way that I prepared for the interview was essentially, right, I wrote my presentation slides and I really kind of tried to go into the math pretty quickly. I can share, I found my slides from my interview, so I can try and just show you what it looks like really quickly. Right. So this is the title slide. Went very quickly with some background, 2 slides of background, and then went to, here's the state of the art, first wave, second wave. And then I sort of argued something about why the second wave is interesting, and then sort of really current work. And then I guess sort of about halfway through, really detailed about the projects in the ERC proposal, methodology, and then 1 summary slide. So really very little about myself. And this was for a 10-minute presentation. Another way that I prepared, so I did this, I had the mock interview. I also just tried to think about questions and try to come up with answers. And you can even just do this, like, say, have your own Word document where you think, okay, like, what questions might people ask me? And just really think, okay, what are you going to say? So the kinds of questions, you know, I mean, they're standard. It's nothing that's truly surprising, I guess. But it's things like, you know, what if this goes wrong and you can't prove it? One good thing to do, which it's also good to put in your proposal in part B2, is contingency plans. You know, like maybe you have a grand idea and it's supposed to prove some big conjecture, but maybe it, you know, doesn't work. You can have maybe a different approach that will prove slightly less, but will definitely work, or something like this. Write about that, right? So that's the kind of thing. Possible answer is, well, since I submitted my grant application, I have been working on this and I actually have some partial progress, right? That's a possible answer to what if it just doesn't work. Partial progress, contingency plans, things like this. Experimental data, you know, whatever might convince people. You know, how would you go about recruiting postdocs or PhD students? You know, what experience do you have with that? I mean, maybe you haven't recruited a postdoc before, but maybe you have recruited a PhD student. Maybe you haven't, but maybe you've sort of acted as a second advisor for somebody. So you still have some mentoring experience, right? So that's a possible answer to that kind of question. Let's see. If you're collaborating or something, you know, like why wouldn't whatever famous person in your field prove this instead of you, right? Why wouldn't some recent Fields medalists do this? Why should, right? You can argue, like, based on your expertise, based on what you're working on, like why you are the natural person to do this. Yeah, things like this. But I found it really useful to really have a document and really try to come up with all possible questions. I guess there are also questions that can really come from reviewers that are more technical. And even for that, I found it useful. I had a colleague once sort of go through my proposal and try to come up with technical things where they would try to stop me. Well, this approach can't possibly work because whatever. And then it's a good thing to, first of all, you don't want to look surprised to the panel, right? If you've really thought about this project, presumably they can't just bring up a point that will just completely kill your proposal. So the first step is to not be surprised and say, I haven't thought about this. And instead you can say, well, yes, but in fact, you know, since then, there's been some new work that shows whatever. And then, you know, that if you combine it with this other idea from whenever, it works in this special case or something, right? Like, but actually think about the technical points and explain that you've, you know, sort of, your proposal is somewhat tight from this point of view, and it can't just be unraveled by one comment from an expert. But yeah, generally in preparing for the interview, the main thing is to just practice. And I was actually very impressed that, yeah, they were, the panelists, they were quite friendly. So I was really prepared for something adversarial, and they were friendly and it went smoothly. But just in case, you know, I think it's fine to be prepared for something where they're just gonna, you know, if they try and destroy your proposal and you're prepared for that, and then you go in and they're friendly, then that's fine. Then it, you know, it's even better. All right, I think this is pretty much what I wanted to say about maybe just to end. Yeah, I said it's very useful. Even if you don't get the grant, it's useful to just sit down and think about, you know, like what research are you going to do over 5 years? That can be useful for you. Another thing that's useful, whether you get the grant or not, is the feedback. So I found the feedback from experts quite useful in the sense that it's clear, like it was thoughtful. You know, they pointed out good approaches or approaches that weren't so good or what they found exciting. And overall, I found that very valuable. And I guess, you know, like if there are positive reviews, that's something that you can keep and look back, say 2 years later and think, okay, you know, this person thinks highly of me or something that can help. And it was also, I was very impressed by the fact that it really seemed like they had asked the experts in my field from all over the world. Like it wasn't people who didn't really know, you know, whether the comments were positive or negative, it felt like they were really carefully considered and they were coming from experts. And I really liked that about the ERC. Yeah, I guess the other thing is, of course, yeah, if you get the good news, then yeah, like it can be a really good thing for your career, right? So if you do get this, it helps a lot with visibility and it helps with career progression, and it helps in the sense that you get to build your own team and you get to, you know, like have younger people that you collaborate with and mentor and so on. So it's really, really a great opportunity. So, and I think it is worth applying for many reasons. Maybe one final thought is you should feel free to ask people for their proposals. Like if you know people who've been successful, you can ask. They might say no, but you can ask. I'm willing to share my B1. I think I'm less willing to share my part B2, but part B1, I'm pretty much willing to share with people. Okay, so yeah, this is all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, and I think it was really useful. Only in the mentoring, of course, yeah, there is not a requirement. So you could have applicants who have never actually supervised anybody, but just as for you to know, the CV is a bit of a free. There's more freedom on what to put on the CV. So now, Stephanie, what do you want to say about your experience as grantee, and maybe you want to say something about your experience as a panel member also?
Okay, so I will try to not repeat advice that's been given. So I really liked the presentation of the previous speaker. So I have had a different approach to some of those things, and maybe I'm just highlighting those differences. So I've decided to talk about 4 different points. So first point that was also addressed by a previous speaker is a decision whether you should apply for this grant. So she said it very well. There is a timing situation. So you should really have an idea of, it should fit in your time of your life and also in the time in your area, whether you can write a convincing proposal. So if you have something like this, then you should really self-assess how good are you? So are you really competitive to get such a grant? And by this, I mean, do not self-exclude. Okay, so don't be falsely modest, trying to exclude yourself before you've even tried. So there is a risk of doing this. There is, of course, one needs to be aware in terms of the timing also that the different levels as they rise up, they get even more difficult to get. So between starting and consolidator and then advanced, this is what I see from my perspective, that one needs to time somewhat. It's better to still fall into the starting category or into the consolidator category rather than the advanced category, which is really extremely, extremely competitive. So then you also need to know that there is the ERC allows you extra time if you had children for those different categories. This is important to know. Then it is also important to know that if you've had a rocky time getting back after you had your children, in my opinion, this is understood. So there's also something you can be honest about this. You get a fixed amount of time extra, but you should be in a position where you have very clearly picked up your research again. Otherwise, the timing just wouldn't be right for you to write such a proposal. You should be thinking about whether the conditions at your home institution are actually sufficient for running this grant. So this is a really serious concern with some home institutions. So many of them will give you the conditions because they really like it if you have such a grant, but in some institutions you have to actually really discuss ahead of time what would be your conditions given to you if you got such a grant. So places with high teaching loads, they might have to calm down a little bit on their teaching load so that you can actually run this grant. So not all institutions are very understanding. So these are things that have to be also right. And if they're not, you should consider, are you willing to move with your grant, which is also a possibility. And of course, you need to think about, even if you have already an idea for a project, do you have the time to write this proposal? And like the previous speaker, I would also say the writing part alone, if you already have quite a clear idea of what your program will be, is at least a month. So that helps with the decision of whether or not it's the right time for you to write such a proposal. Now about the proposal itself. So again, many things have already been said by the previous two speakers. Again, I want to stress also because I've been on a panel. So this part B1, it's extremely important, not only that it's readable to a generalist, but that it also can excite a generalist. So it should be visible in B1. So why is this really exciting mathematics? They should be able to understand it and somewhat evaluate it. You should be able to make clear why you are really central in this area, while mentioning other competitors and other mathematicians working there. But there has to be a link between what you have already done, what you have demonstrated, and what you're proposing. So it's not only the proposal that will be evaluated, as was said before, it's also your accomplishments so far in combination, in conjunction with the proposal, the whole package. Then even for B2, it is true that these are supposed to be experts, but it is not really my experience that the experts are all that close to what you're doing. So you have to be really still slowing down about extremely technical parts. And you also still have to really spend time making it clear that what you're doing is really very exciting. So you can't assume that the people are so close to you that they already know this. So this is also, don't think of your collaborators, they're not going to be reviewers. It's going to be still generally in your area, but not really as close as, let's say, a referee of a paper will be much closer to you than a remote referee of your proposal. Then there is a difference between extended synopsis and methodology. So be sure that you understand that difference, okay? So that has already been discussed what that difference is, but it has to be present in those two parts, respectively. Then the most important part that I feel, which also makes the interview process for you better, is if you are very honest. So you should describe yourself and no more and no less. Okay, so you should be honest about what you can do and who you are, which problems are difficult, which problems have extremely high risk, which things you're suggesting are more feasible, which ones are actually a good project for a student, and so on. So you should not claim that you are an expert in 3 or 4 areas when you're really only an expert in 2. So this is something very dangerous. Don't do this. So the people evaluating you will be very experienced. In all likelihood, they will see through if you can't back up what you're actually writing. So don't forget to mention why your project is interesting, but this is should be already answered before you even start writing. So you should only really write proposals about very interesting, groundbreaking ideas to which you are central. And you are expected in part B2. Well, I don't want to say you are expected, but I felt that it was necessary to give a type of a risk assessment because you're also going to be working with junior people. So if you are working with a junior people, the projects should be competitive, but there should be a fallback plan. If something doesn't work out, you don't want to leave a junior person after 3 years of work with no results. So these aspects I try to consider in my proposal. Then I did something really silly in my proposal. And I think I was lucky that the panel gave me a chance to rectify it during the interview. I said something like, well, in mathematics, it's not really possible to make a timeline. And so, of course, they want the timeline if they're going to give you money for 5 years to run a large group. So this is not the same as a regular NSF grant. It's not the same as a singular grant just for yourself. You're supposed to be a group leader. You have to be able to organize things, and this kind of competence will be questioned. So if you write something like this in your proposal, you're going to be asked during the interview, what do you mean by this? So it is a little bit more of a manager style than we are used to in mathematics. So this is definitely the part that I found most difficult. And now reading my proposal, I think this was probably the weak part of my proposal. I think it was I think the ideas and the problems in it were quite convincing, but the managerial part was not good. And this is also where I'm very different from the previous speaker. I'm not someone who is very comfortable asking for help. So this is a little bit tied to how much support you have where you are and how your area is. So while I love my colleagues and while I love people who are working in my area, it's extremely competitive, and it's happened more than once that people read proposals and say, hey, that's a cool question. Why don't I do this now with the following 3 people? So this happens in my area all the time. And so I don't really share. I don't even share my B1. I don't show it to anybody. So this is just what I do. So if this is the kind of area you're working in, and if this is what you're comfortable with, you can still get a grant. You can still do this, but you have to take a lot of care, really critically reading what you're doing several times by yourself. So this is what I did, but I think I was a little older than the previous speaker. I was a consolidator level, and on top of that, relatively high on the seniority spectrum for that age group, where it is probably more likely that you can just write a proposal without lots of people reading it over. I did, however, get help by a person who proposed it, who gave me general tips about the interviews, which I found extremely helpful. So again, a lot of things I've written here were already said, so I'm not saying them again. And I'm continuing to the interview itself. So you have seen an example of a presentation, which is why I'm not showing mine. Mine was very similar. So this is also what's very important. Don't be tempted to, again, sell yourself, showing who you are. This is really about your proposal and what you want to work in those 5 years. You should only mention things about yourself if something very drastic has changed. If you've gotten a major award or a huge acceptance in a wonderful journal or something. This is maybe something that you might want to do. Then it has to be timed carefully. And again, practicing, I just have never in my life practiced a talk. And this was not an exception. And there is, again, if you are the type of person who gets extremely nervous when they're practicing something because they feel extremely silly, you can still do it. Now, I have no idea how I managed to be done exactly on point without timing it, but it worked. Okay, I mean, you have to you know exactly what's on your slides, and they put a large clock next to you, so you see exactly how much time has elapsed. And if you have the ability to time it as you go, then you don't have to practice it. And for me, I cannot do this to practice lectures. So again, if you're not the practicing type or the practicing interview type, you can still do it. It's a personal choice. Then I have, for the interview, what I found very interesting, there's this waiting room where they put you with a lot of other people. You have to show up 2 or 3 hours early. And I thought I was nervous, but seeing the other people, I realized I wasn't actually nervous. So people are really, really, really nervous. And here is now me telling you, don't be nervous. It's not worth it. If you wrote the proposal honestly, if this is really about your work and about what you can do, there isn't going to be a question that someone asks how much you know about geometry if you're an analyst. It's not going to happen. They're going to talk about your proposal. It might not even be their questions that they're asking you. It might be some questions that come from the remote reviewers. And it is, you should see it as something that you do all the time. You will talk to mathematicians. Now, those are mathematicians not exactly in your area, but I also had a very positive experience with the visit in Brussels, and the interview, I really enjoyed it actually. And the conversations were interesting. So the questions that I remember, there were really definitely questions about my saying I couldn't give a timeline. So then I did give a timeline and it was satisfactory. They wanted to see that I had a clear idea in which order I would proceed, which I could answer during the interview. Then if you're claiming a certain expertise in an area that's not yours, there were questions about this. So they really wanted to know if this was really true. And there you shouldn't get offended. I mean, I did not, and indeed, I was able to answer those questions. So this, don't say anything that you can't really back up. They will see it. If you've never published anything in numerical analysis and you claim some expertise in using computers to get data, they will ask you how you do it. So this is also something that I noticed. And let's see what else I have. Yes, and it's already been said. So the answers again are to the entire panel. You want to you want to really listen what the question's really asking. You want to answer briefly and clearly and really to the point and in a very clinical way. So none of these questions are intended to harm you. These questions are intended to help you to defend your proposal. Then yes, actually, again, about the help. Yes, I was also sent all over the place to do these fake interviews. And I have to say, for me, they were really incredibly non-helpful. They were the opposite of helpful. And I understand that most people react better to this than I do. So for me, these fake interviews, first of all, they were not at all realistic to what was actually happening in the real interview, which was much nicer than any of the fake interviews. So if anything, this somehow made me more nervous. So again, the people who were trying to help at the time from the French system, they may have not been on a panel before, so they didn't really know what kind of questions came. And so it had absolutely nothing to do with how the interview went in the end. So I think it is better, as the previous speaker also said, you can think about, put yourself in the position of the panel. What would you ask about your proposal? What would be not clear? What would be not convincing? Some time has passed between you writing it and you actually getting the interview. You read the proposal again several times and you try to shoot down your own proposal. Okay, so that way you can be prepared for some questions. And then after you receive your good news, you have to be extremely careful about the legal aspects at your home institution. So this is unfortunate. I made some very bad experiences there. So you have to be very, very careful. What kind of contract are they giving you? Or are they even refusing to give you a contract? Because many times you're going to be paid from this ERC money and it might just really go wrong. So it can really happen. And this is where the help of the ERC is not, they cannot really interfere with the actions of the host institution. So the moment when you're really negotiating the terms is when you have to be somewhat careful at some home institutions. Now I've moved to a different place and it's completely different, extremely supportive and not the same at all. So I think this varies greatly depending on where you're at. So then the same is true also about the legal aspects, and it's already been said, when you're writing a proposal, you have to be in control of your budget. So this is often very tempting. You're busy writing the proposal, you worry about the math, you let someone else help you too much with the budget. So in my case, the budget was completely incorrect, and this really was a really bad mistake. So there is something beyond how many postdocs you have and what you want to do. You should really master how these budgets are in your country calculated. So this is worth spending half a day really researching it. So, and then I have 2 more points. One of them is the process in the panel. So you can be assured that everybody in this panel will do their absolute best to evaluate these proposals fairly. So the sole criterion is excellence. This is really something that is very highly valued. It is not your host institution. It's not where you got your PhD. It's not who is your advisor. It's about who you are and your work and what you've done and how good your proposed work is and where your vector is going in the field. What is very, very hard about being on this panel is that there are simply very, very, very many really convincing, excellent candidates. So that I found to be extremely draining and difficult. So I think this I have in common with absolutely every panel member. And we are spending a lot of time already in the reviewing of the B1s. So this can be quite a different area. So I would also make sure that I allowed a lot of time for each one of those B1 proposals and 2 minutes, yeah, and be aware that panel members have to read a lot of these B1 proposals. Okay, so this is important to know. And the B2 proposals, people who read those, there are fewer people. So not one person doesn't have to read more than 3 or 4 B2 proposals. Now, one important thing, last point, the process itself for the applicant. I think what's very important advice, do not get sucked into it too much. It's going to be too annoying. Force yourself to focus on other things. Don't let your research slide just because you're writing a proposal and just because you are preparing some interview. Don't make your life about this interview and about getting this grant. It's too, it is not going to be as good of an experience as when you actually keep your life and continue with your research and the things that you really like to do. So this is really the most important advice, in my opinion, to get through the process.
So thank you so much. I think you gave great advice and really detailed advice on the different aspects on 2 different approaches to the proposal. We only have 1 minute for questions. There was one question on the deadlines for the 2022 grants, and I already answered there. You have the link. So starting will be around January 2022. For consolidator will be March 2022, and for advanced is April 2022. If you have any other question, please type it in the Q&A and we can answer. And then otherwise, we will give this as concluded, and you're free to come again to the booth and then ask if you have more particular questions or something else. Synergy.
Another question, yeah.
Yeah, Synergy 2022 is meant to be in July, is open, the deadline, and the closure is November. Is it? No, sorry, I'm talking about it's nothing yet for, yeah, November. So it's actually open, it's opening in July 2021 and it will close in November 2021. That's for Synergy 2022. So Anna, Stephanie, many thanks for your valuable advice, and many thanks for people who have been listening, and hope to see more applications coming to the PE1 panel. There is one more question. Okay. Great. See you then. Thanks, Stephanie. Thanks, Anna. Thanks, Laura, for being there for the questions.
That's okay. Bye-bye.